Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry Podcast. This is episode number 430, and our guest today is Gabriel from Ivory Holsters. Gabriel sent me an email back in the summer of 2018, and at the time he was just a small local business making custom Kydex holsters in his garage part-time. He had some questions for me about using holsters on our packs, and we began a conversation and ultimately ended up prototyping some holster designs built specifically for pack use, and then released those holsters. I should say Gabriel released those holsters at the end of 2018, and he's been selling them ever since. They are by far my favorite holster solution for pack use. We don't have any affiliation with Gabriel, no commission, no business relationship at all, other than Gabriel makes the best holster for our packs, and he's a great dude, and we're happy to recommend him. All that said to say, we catch up with Gabriel 5 years later. We talk a little bit about the holsters up front, but really, I reached out to Gabriel to hear about his elk hunt from this fall. Gabriel had a fun, adventurous elk hunt. It was a tag that he drew in his home state of Colorado for archery season, and it's just a great story. We, again, talk about holsters. We talk about the death hike. Gabriel has done one of the EXO death hikes, but he's also been one of the guys who's taken our advice and made his own death hike. And him and a group of friends have done that a couple of times now. So we talk about that experience. We talk about his elk hunts, solo hunting, and just went so many places in this conversation, and there's so much good to pull from it. So I hope that you guys enjoy this episode and this wide-ranging conversation. Check out the links below in the show description if you do want to get in contact with Gabriel, if you want to see the EMG, which just stands for EXO Mountain Gear, the EMG pack holster that he makes. As you'll hear in the episode, he's also making holsters for archery, handheld releases, and he makes standard inside the waistband holsters for concealed carry. So he has a lot to offer, even outside of the pack holsters. But again, aside from the holsters, I just hope you enjoy this story as much as I did. There's a lot to pull from it, lessons, entertainment, and more. Thanks as always for tuning in. Let's dive into this conversation. Well, Gabriel, super excited to chat, man. Do you remember when the last time you were on the podcast was? And I think the only time. Correct me if my memory sucks.
Yeah, it had to be like January. It's got to be like 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah, try 5.
Was it?
Yeah, I had to look. It was actually December of
Okay.
2018. So just under 5 years, which is
Wow.
insane.
That's amazing. I did not remember that.
Yeah, I didn't
I
either. I
remember
had to
being
look.
on and being like super nervous, but I don't remember. And then we did it over the phone, so it sounded all like fuzzy and whatever. But now
Yeah.
I've totally upgraded, as you can hear.
Well, I think we were working around crazy schedules then too, because you were working, I think then you were working at the airport, right?
Yeah. Yep. Still at the airport, and then you guys had just put out a newsletter. And I remember I was in Steamboat when you guys put out the newsletter. You and I had talked, and the newsletter went out about the holsters, and the phone just started, just every time you'd get an order that would come in, it would go bring, bring, bring. And I remember standing, I'm in a hotel room with my wife in Steamboat, and that started going off, and I was like, we got to get home now. And I was like freaking out because you guys had put that out, and just stuff went crazy after that. So it was, I definitely remember that season of Ivory. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I've never asked you this question. I mean, I know from knowing you and talking a little bit, but your perspective now, those 5 years, and fill listeners in, what's the ride been like? What's changed? Yeah, where are you at now? I know it's super open-ended, but I'd just love to hear more about the journey.
No, it's man, you and I have to talk numbers at some point, but um we, yeah, basically just ever since the the notification went out that you guys put out first 5 years ago. It's just been absolutely nuts to the point where this last year, it was, I think June of last year, I ended up basically there was just no gas left in the tank. So I was working at the airport full time and probably 50 hours a week. And then I would come home, eat dinner with the four boys and Melissa, and then yeah, go out to the garage and hammer on holsters until it was bedtime, and then just wake up and repeat, wake up and repeat. And it just got to the point where I didn't have enough gas left in the tank, and it was like I needed to either stop with the business or stop with the airport. And I just had uh, this like fear of regret. I literally saw myself sitting in my lazy boy at like 65 years of age, just hating myself for not taking the jump when God had given me the opportunity. And so I came home and I was like, sweetheart, I think God's calling me to make the jump and get away from the airport. And that was a job of 20 years. And super stable benefits. I mean, everything. It was like the easiest thing to do would have been to shut down Ivory and then run at the airport until retirement, which would have been another, whatever, 10, 15 years. And I just had that feeling. It was like, you absolutely hate yourself if you don't try this and just see what comes of it. And so I told her, I was like, I remember sitting on the couch. I was like, I think he's calling me to go full time with Ivory. And she goes, okay, let's pick a date. And I was like, what? Uh, she was incredible. So yeah, we picked a date, and it was one of those things where we're like, we still weren't 100% sure, like if this is what we're supposed to do. There's always that little tiny bit of doubt. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, if I'm talking to God, I'm like, all right, God, if this is what you want us to do, I need you to, if this is not. So I was told him, we were like, okay, here's the date. If this is not what you want us to do, you got to slap us in the face with it. And nothing happened. So we're like, all right, well, it's time. And sure enough, quit. And it's been you talk about the ride. It's been really tight, much tighter than when I had both jobs. But the freedom has been unbelievable, Mark. Like the ability to be home. I have coffee with my wife every morning, 3 meals a day with the boys. We homeschool, so there's they're home all the time. I'm literally in the garage, and they can, if they need something or whatever, I'm there. It's just I didn't realize how freeing it would be not having to wake up and go to the airport every morning, but it's been unbelievable. I don't know if that answers your question or if you wanted to, more in between, but man, it's far greater than what I ever thought it would be.
That's awesome, man. What you said that was June, this past June or the year before? So like 2022 or 2023?
Uh, no, 2022. Yep.
Okay. So
So
it's been like a
we're almost
year,
2 years
over
in.
a
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Apologize. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And it's funny because it was a federal government job. And so I was 19 and a half years in. And so like the normal cutoff is like the 20 years. That's when you collect your retirement and all that stuff. Um, Although I still will collect retirement, but it'll be, when I'm 62, and everybody's like, you're quitting at 19 and a half years. And so the very bottom line is I called the financial gal and I'm like, what's the difference between 19 and 20 years? And she's like, it's really nothing. So she ran the numbers and she's like, it'd be an extra, whatever, $100 a month,
hmm
when you finally retire and start collecting. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but it's one of those things people are like, dude, you almost had your 20, and there's this like magic number of 20 in the federal government. And yeah, it's not as big of a deal as everybody thinks.
Man, that's cool. I'm partially curious because I don't know, like, I don't, I know how you make holsters and I don't know how you make holsters. I'm curious,
Yeah.
what does efficiency, production, like scaling, are you making holsters the same way you did 5 years ago when it was a side project? Or do you have like updated equipment, things like that, and are more efficient?
We just got more equipment. So instead of one single vacuum former, we're running two vacuum formers, actually three now. But it's still not as nearly as refined as what it needs to be. So there's a process that I'm working on to try and basically come up with it'll allow me to form each half of the shell and then just use a router to zip them out, as opposed to right now there's a ton of like custom hand sanding and stuff like that that goes on, which is not, it's just not sustainable in the current form. I just haven't had the time or made the time because I keep doing other stuff. I got another project I want to tell you about that a matter of fact, I'm going to send you some stuff real shortly here. I'm so excited. But we did, since we started doing the release holsters, I bought two CNC machines, little guys. It's like a CNC router. And so I've got those running, being able to help significantly as opposed to doing all that stuff by hand. And then the product is much more consistent, and it's pretty well perfect every single time. And so those have been a huge upgrade. For that, I can't use those yet for like the EMG holsters, but for the release holsters, those have been a godsend. And it's totally out of my wheelhouse. Like I have my machinist, my CNC guy, send me a file, and I'm like, hey, send me the file so that it routers out this, and he'll send the file, and then I make sure the trim board is set properly. And I don't do any like CAD or CAM or any kind of design work at all. I'm just pay a guy to do it and make sure the machine runs properly. But man, those are huge. So 3 vacuum formers, 2 CNC routers, and then just the normal stuff that you've seen like on Instagram, belt sander and bandsaw and all the rough cutting and stuff like that still. But there's a new process coming, and so it just takes time and money. That's all. So I'm working on that so I can basically teach a donkey how to do it, and then I can kind of,
Because you have
train.
4 donkeys, right?
Right, I do. I do. They don't want to work, but yeah, they can. Yeah.
So you mentioned release holster. Just to clarify for listeners who may not know, you're talking archery releases, like handheld releases, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
And I know
ahead.
you make those for like some of the knock-on releases, but what all do you offer release wise? Is that a bunch of different models or?
No, so right this second as we speak, the only one that we have is I say that, I take it back. The knock-on one, so we sell those to knock-on, and they sell directly through their site. So you can't even, I don't
So
sell
they're
those
not
at
on your
all.
site. Okay.
Correct. But I did just within the last, since I got back from this hunt, just came out with, I got the forms and the CNC machines running hot, and that's what I'm going to send you. I came up with it's a new release holster for the Carter 3-finger releases. And as of right now, it'll work for at least 4 of their releases. They're 3 fingers. So like the Wise Choice, First Choice, the Chocolate Addiction. And then I think it's called the Too Simple, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Minimum, it'll work for those 4. But anyway, I sent a few of those to the guys at Carter to have them, test and stuff like that. But Mark, I've not been this excited since the EMG holster. It's amazing. It's got adjustable retention, and you can mount it either vertically or horizontally. So, the Molly panel on the shoulder strap of the EXO,
Mm-hmm.
you can mount it vertically to that, or obviously put it on a belt or whatever you want. The thing is, it's so stinking cool. And
That's
if
awesome.
you're a Carter release guy, it'll hopefully work for which the more popular releases. So yeah, I got a few on the bench. One is for you. I thought you said at one point you ran a Carter.
Yeah, I do have one. I mean, I have multiple releases, but I do have a Carter.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, so you'll have one in the mail shortly here. But
Nice,
that
man.
that I'm super excited about. It's so refined, and it's just I'm pretty stinking proud of it.
You and I worked together on the EMG holster, like a pack
Yeah.
holster, and to address what I thought were some of the not problems, but like up until we made the EMG holster, I didn't, there wasn't a pack specific holster. And so in my head, it was just like, hey, there's all these holsters on the market you can put on a pack. They work, they attach, they're functional, but like with some tweaks, this would be, here's some ideas that I think would make a pack specific holster better. And that's essentially what, I mean, you made it, but I just kind of ranted at you about some ideas. They've done well. It's been cool to see. I'm curious, like, what is Have you made changes to them? Like really, I think fundamentally they're relatively
No,
similar to what you made 5 years ago.
not at all. The one that the final version that you and I came up with, um, and to your point, your thing was like stability. I just don't want it flopping around. That was, I think, your main thing was to because we worked on single point of what do you want to call it, retention on the belt versus 2 points, and yeah, it was since then it has not changed. The I think I changed the jig that it's made on to make them more consistent, but outside of that, it's the exact same holster as you and I came up with, and hasn't changed a lick since.
What are popular models right now for AMG holsters? Like, and what I'm getting at, I guess, is not so much talking about our packs or talking about your holsters, but more talking about the firearms. Are you still seeing a ton
Yeah,
of like 10 mils or what is really popular? Like if you had to off the top of your
yeah,
head, the top 3 to 5 models that you make a holster for.
yeah, for sure. The 10 mils have gotten so popular, and for a while it's still the Glock 20 is by far the number one. Um, but since then, Springfield has come out with one, Smith and Wesson, and Sig came out with that X10, and those have just gone uh, kind of gangbusters. The 10 mils guys in the backcountry, just there's a ton of comfort, I would say, and value in having like 16 rounds of super hot 10 millimeter. And so they're just buying them up. So the top models would be the Glock 20, the Springfield XDM. They make 3 or 4 different sizes of 10 millimeter that Springfield does. The Smith and Wesson, they make 2 different sizes, a 4.6 barrel and then a 4.0 barrel, and those are super popular too. And then the X10, and then after that, I think it's probably the Glock 19, just because everybody seems to have one. And I would say that even in a 9 mil like the Glock 19 is, you still got some of this ammo is so incredible, like as far as like penetration and speed and um, capacity, that a lot of guys are just like, you know what, I'm feeling without having to go buy a new 10 millimeter, pretty darn comfortable carrying 16 rounds of some of these, even the solid copper or solid brass rounds. They're just getting such amazing penetration in some of them. I've seen some of them zip through bulletproof glass. It's incredible.
Hmm.
And yeah, those are probably the top five. I would say those 410 mils, and then the Glock 19, and then it goes into like some of the smaller stuff too. The Shield has always been real popular, the Smith and Wesson Shield. So yeah, it's those I would say are the top ones.
Do you personally carry like we're getting ready to talk about an elk hunt in your home state there? Do you carry on a hunt like that?
I did. Yeah, I did. I do for a couple of reasons. One is more like, hey, you can't exactly sell a product without being out there and using
And
it.
using it, yeah.
That's, yeah, I think so. The unit I was in this year, they had a horrible winter kill for the bears, and it sounds like the winter was so bad that basically the bears just didn't come back out of hibernation. They died. I'm hearing up to, um, and not in the unit I was in, but the adjacent unit was like 80% is what the division was saying to some of the hunters I
Wow.
know up there. 80% of they didn't find anything, and it made sense because when we were up there, we saw 2, maybe 3 piles of bear scat, and that was it. And they were small, so I'm not super concerned about bears. But there's always like you don't know. There's always could be some weirdo in the woods. I just get a sense of comfort. So I was for a long time carrying the Glock 20 on the K3, and I wore the K4 this year, and I figure like I can go lighter, so I carried um, the XD. No, I'm sorry, it's the 365 XL, that 9 mil
Oh yeah,
with the
that's
17
sweet.
round mag in it. It's so nice. It's light. Yeah, I stinking love that thing, and that's my like quote daily carry gun as well. So
Yeah.
it's nice to be able to just switch back and forth. If I was going into grizzly country, I'd definitely take the one of the 10 mils for sure. But yeah,
Hmm.
carried it all season long. Matter of fact, I carried, and we did a death hike here in Colorado like a couple of months ago, and I carried the 20 on that just to mount it to the K4 and kind of see how it felt and stuff like that. And so yeah, it's just a constant work in progress and trying to figure out how to make it lighter or more comfortable or more stable or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you do optic cuts for like those 10 mils?
Yeah. Yep. We don't right now don't do anything in the way of like lighted rigs, but I am working on something uh right now actually uh to make us able to build holsters for some of those bigger frame revolvers and then lighted rigs, but they're not. So back to the EMG, they're not all cut for an optic, just standard. But a lot of times I'll just have the customer put in the notes section when they make the order that they've got an optic on it, and yeah, we trim it down and um, make sure that it's able to clear those optics. Yeah. Are you running an optic on yours?
Not right now. I've toyed with it. I just was somewhat curious, A, if you're doing it, and B, do you feel like that's getting more popular?
Oh, for sure. Um, yeah, it's funny. There was a guy that he's a guide. Excuse me, he's a guide in New Zealand, and he actually wrote me an article after using the holster. Super kind person. But he was talking about how, as a guide, he has an optic on his gun, and he got so much like debris and just crap on the optic that he is fully sworn off optics in the backcountry. Now, obviously, like on your carry gun or range gun or whatever your precision pistol shooting stuff, you cannot, you just can't shoot any better uh, with iron sights than you can an optic. And I honestly don't care like who you are. You if you put a red dot on it, you're going to shoot better as long as you can practice enough to where you can find that red dot every time. But this guy made a really good point about how there were a couple of times where he would draw and practice and just couldn't even see the red dot because there was so much crap that had gotten into his red dot. And I know they've got some fully enclosed models now that are super cool. They're a little pricey, but it looks like a giant box on top of your gun. But
Hmm.
man, those might be the answer. They're fully enclosed to where nothing can interrupt the laser or the light. But man, they're just big and ugly, but
Yeah.
they work, and they're for the backcountry guy, that might be the ticket versus some of those reflex like open pieces of glass.
You mentioned Death Hike. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about that before we get into your hunt because I think that I'm assuming I we haven't talked about your hunt, so this is like very off the cuff. I don't know the details. I'm excited with the listeners to hear about it, but I think if I had to guess that your experience with death hikes probably helped or influenced your hunt a bit.
Oh, it was huge.
You're not typically when we've had people on the podcast to talk about the death hike, they're kind of like they've generally been part of the crew, like meaning they've done multiple death hikes over the years and things like that. But that hasn't been the case for you. So just what has your experience exposure been to death hikes, like both ours as well as you mentioned you guys did some of your own. Uh I'd love to hear about it.
Oh man, it was so from what was it February we were at the Salt Lake show, and then that was when it got really real. So it's funny because Dione came up and he's like, "Hey, you're gonna do this thing?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I would love to, but I'm not quite sure if I got the full invite." It's so funny. I get all self-conscious and like girly about it, but I Steve did at one point. I remember I'm having a margarita and talking to Steve on the phone about the holster, and he's like, "Hey, man, we got to get you up here for a death hike." And I'm like, "Dione, that's all it was. It was like an in passing kind of thing." And Dione's like, "No, no, no, man, that was definitely an invite. You're good." And I'm like, "All
Yeah.
right."
That's just Steve. That's
Yeah.
official. Like as casual as that is, that's official.
Oh, that's so funny. So yeah, I ended up going in, and so from February on until the death hike, I trained my tail off, like to the end that I've always had like the legs of a 13-year-old girl. Like I love benching, but man, I hate leg days, and I knew I needed to work it out. And so towards the closer we got to the death hike, my wife was like, "Sweetheart, your legs are looking big." Like, and I was starting to notice it too. And so I'm like, "Okay, I can do this." And then I saw you. I may stalk you and Kyle Camp on Strava. And so I saw you guys were doing like Kyle's doing like 13, 15, 18-mile runs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get killed on this thing. And so I started ramping it up and doing the runs, like, thinking, okay, well, if they're doing it, that they know something I don't. And so I started cranking up the runs. And anyway, uh, when we got there, it was, obviously I was nervous. It was my first time doing one with you guys, and I definitely wanted to show up, but I was, for lack of a better term, I embarrassed myself. It was not. I thought for a minute, I was like, okay, you've been working really hard. You're in decent shape. You can totally hang. And these guys, dude, when Steve said go, it was just like dust. I was like, holy crap. And I don't know if it was nerves that got me, and I was breathing heavy, and I was having a real hard time, trying to keep up. Um, but I was like, there's no way I can keep pace with these guys. I can make it, but I'm just going to be a day behind everybody else, right? And so,
Right.
so that was a huge rude awakening for me. Although I do take a bit of pride knowing that we went over, like, I didn't chicken out on Chicken Out Ridge. No offense to anybody that did, but went over Chicken Out Ridge, which was super cool, and then Bora Summit was amazing. But yeah, man, and thank God for Corey Ford, because he's hung with me the whole time, and he's got a very, um, I guess, laid back type of an attitude where he's not like high pressure, like go, go, go. It's just, we'll get there. And so anyway, that one I didn't show up like I would have liked. And this is me trying to be gentle with myself, but I didn't show up like I would have liked. So, uh, when we got back to Colorado, we had already planned an Ivory one, which doesn't have nearly the elevation. It was about 6,600 feet of elevation, but it was 38 miles. And we did kind of an overnighter there. A bunch of cool stuff happened on that one where we got separated, but that helped so much, man. And it's funny because some of the guys I was with on the Colorado one were like, holy crap, dude, you're like a mountain goat. And I'm like, if I'm a mountain goat in this group, like, those guys, the EXO guys are freaking, like, not even in this world. They're just absolute animals. But my wife, when I got home, so this hunt I had a buddy with me, ended up, he had to leave on Sunday. And I did end up killing and packing this one out solo. And those death hikes helped so much. I think, as I think about it now, more than anything, mentally, they helped me so much to be able to do the solo pack out. Just because I remember, like, talking to myself in the woods, like, dude, you don't have a time limit. There's no reason to rush. Take your time. It's whatever. It's a heavy load. You don't have to rush. And there's that thing in me that's like, okay, go, 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 get the meat off the mountain. It's gonna spoil all that stuff. And it just really, really helped with the mental grit portion of it, being able to be by myself for, 3 days after Kenny had left, and then just slow but steady pack it out and just get it done. So yeah, it's more of a mental grit thing, if you ask me, that helped than it was the physical. For sure helped a lot, but the ability to just grit through it and get my head wrapped around the task was much more beneficial, coming from the death hikes. That's what I took from those, being the benefit versus the physical stuff.
Yeah. 100%, man. I agree. We've, we get people reach out about the death hike when they hear about us doing it and like want to join and stuff like that. And for a whole bunch of reasons, we can't typically open it up. Like, some of that's just logistics, some of it's liability, et cetera, et cetera. But we always encourage people, like, hey, just because you can't necessarily join with us on a death hike, don't let that keep you from grabbing some buddies and doing your own. And we've had podcast listeners do that, and some stories and stuff like that. Obviously, you're an example of that. Like, you've done it. This wasn't the first year you guys did a Colorado one with your own, right?
No, we did one in 2020 and then had to skip a couple. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was exactly what you say. I was listening to the podcast on the death hike, and I'm like, that sounds so amazing. And then you were like, well, do your own. And I was like, well, heck yeah, we're gonna do it then. And it was like, that's exactly what it was. It was you guys going, hey, if you can't, be in Idaho or Alaska or whatever, just do your own. So I was like, sweet. So I just sent out a text, and I didn't even have to plan the route. I got a buddy that's kind of a nerd at that, and so he planned out the route, and it was, yeah, man, it was awesome. And it's one of those things, like, you it would have never happened before. It's not anything that would have been even on my radar had I not known that it existed, right? You guys do this, and I'm like, holy crap, that sounds like fun. I never would have thought of that. I'm not like, I used to be the kind of guy who's like, I'm not going hiking unless there's like a lake at the top and I can catch fish, or there's something to kill, or
Yeah.
something like
It has
that.
to have a
And
point. Yeah.
yeah, but man, there is a point, and I'll say that the camaraderie of it is unbelievable. It's going through hard stuff with other good like-minded men is undervalued for sure. And so yeah, I was like super happy when we did the first one, and it ended up being amazing. Even though there's those moments where you're like, what the hell are we doing? Why? This is so stupid. Why am I here? Right? Like in those really painful moments, like, well, I'm so dumb. And then you get to the end and you're like, that was amazing. I can't wait to plan the next one. Right. So you know the feeling.
Yeah, for sure. What happened? You said some interesting stuff happened this year with getting separated and whatnot. What's the story there?
So I had one of my buddies, one of the like best men I've ever met, super good dude, Mikey. He was up there, and I don't know if it was nerves for him, or because he packed his bag like as he showed up at camp the night before. He threw all of his crap in his bag, and he was having a really hard time the first night, or first morning, and got to a point where we ran almost the same route as we had done in 2020, but I added a 6 mile loop to it. And so we were at the point where we were about to cut off to go to the 6 mile loop, and he was having a bit of a hard time. And so Kenny and Mike were like, look, we're going to go the normal route that neither of them had been. So we're going to go the same route as last year, and we'll just meet you after the 6 mile loop. Well, we had taken, so one of my other buddies had taken, because Mikey was weighted down, we had taken his sleeping bag and sleeping pad from him to lighten his load. And then we did the 6 mile loop, and we ended up like crazy river crossing. One of our guys fell in the creek or in the river, and he hiked the last 25 miles in wet boots. It was horrible for him. Anyway, it was, you know him though. It was Joel from Hunt Hike
Oh yeah,
Harvest.
yeah.
Yeah, he he fell he didn't want to take the time to put his Crocs on and cross the creek, and instead decided he was going to risk it, and it did not pay off. And so it took us longer to make that 6 mile loop than what we thought. And so Kenny and Mike ended up being at the meeting place for like 2 hours, an hour and a half. They waited as we were doing this 6 mile loop. And anyway, they knew where camp was, so they go on their way. Well, we're about 45 minutes behind them based on the note that they had left for us, and so we're trying to catch them, but there's a portion where our camp is up at this lake, and so you basically have to come off the main trail, hang a left, and go. It's basically a 2 mile climb to the lake, which is where camp was supposed to be. Well, we're thinking it's starting to get a little dark, and we know Mikey doesn't have a sleeping bag or sleeping pad, and they're gonna be at camp. So instead of taking the trail down the 1 mile and then up 2 miles to get to camp, we actually decided to bushwhack it, which was the dumbest thing we could have done.
Mm-hmm.
And so we bushwhack it. Well, we show up there, and there's no one there. I take it back. There was one tent there, and it's 10:30 at night. And I walk up to this tent, and I go, Kenny, and I hear from inside the tent, a guy goes, yeah. And I go, the rest of us are all standing. There's like 7 guys. They're like, yeah, we're all screaming like, Kenny's here. And the dude from inside the tent goes, not Kenny. I was like, oh, sorry, dude. So
Oh,
we ended up setting up our tents knowing that Kenny and Mike are somewhere else. And he doesn't have any of his gear or any of his sleeping gear. So they actually stayed at the T where we were supposed to turn left and go up the 2 miles, and they were waiting for us. And bottom line, they set up camp and marked. It was the 2 of them, and we know they don't have their gear. And we're like, well, it is what it is. Mikey's going to have the worst night of his life, and he's never coming with us again. And so the 2 of them climb into one tent. Kenny has his sleeping pad, and it's one of those like super awkward, like, moments where you're like, it's going to get super cold. It's already chilly.
yeah.
He's got a mummy bag, and Kenny's like, dude, just come on up, like get on the sleeping pad, cover. So Kenny's like, the one caveat I have is I'm taking the foot box. So Kenny uses the foot box in his mummy bag and throws the rest of the sleeping bag over Mikey, and they're like kind of tussling over it.
Yeah.
He goes, Gabe, it got to be I think it was 4:30 in the morning, and finally, because they had been wrestling over it, finally, Kenny's laying on his side. He goes, I felt Mikey roll up onto the sleeping pad and put the bag over him. He goes, it was the best 2 hours of sleep either of us had ever had. Two dudes, one bag. It was hilarious, and I was like, well, Mikey might never ever come back, but yeah, that last 2 hours was like the best sleep the two of them had ever had because their body warmth was keeping each other warm, and they had just finally gotten over the awkwardness.
Right.
And now it's one of those things where they're like, dude, if that ever happens again, just crawl into the bag. We're not even going to mess with it. Just, I know it's
Yeah.
weird. We're just going to do it.
Oh man, that's so good. See, that stuff never happens unless you just like, let's go have an adventure, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, let's get into the hunt. I, what is your last handful of years of hunting looked like? Because I know you've been, you got 4 kids, you got the business, like all these life changes. I think you primarily just focus on archery, elk. Uh, but before we get into this particular hunt, just kind of like fill us in on hunting the last few years for you.
Yeah. So I hunt uh, archery and rifle every year for elk. I'm not into deer. Uh, Although I have shot a couple of deer, it's fun, but it's not. I don't get the same charge out of it. And so archery, elk, and then most of the time that's like super early season because that's when we've had the best luck where the elk haven't had humans around in the last 11 months, and although they're not bugling, they come in silent pretty good. And then rifle season has always been first rifle here in Colorado. So it's like somewhere around October 10th, 11th, 12th, right in there is when it starts. And that normally goes for 5 days. But that's the same season we've been hunting for the last probably 15 years. And we have really, really pretty decent luck at that too in the unit that we're in. Oddly enough, this year we did not draw a first season rifle tag because the winter kill was so bad up where we hunt. Um, excuse me. The division shut down just a ton of tags. So two of the guys in our group drew first season rifle tags, and normally you would see legitimately between 6 and 9 trucks at this one draw that we go up. And they were like, dude, there was one single truck there. So I don't know if they just didn't issue enough tags or people were turning their tags back in, but the winter kill was super bad this year up where we hunt just south of Steamboat. And so yeah, we ended up drawing. My son and I drew it's his first year elk hunting. He just turned 12 4 days ago. And so it's his first year elk hunting. We both drew fourth season rifle tags. So I'm doing everything I can to try and keep this 80-pound skinny little 12-year-old as warm as I possibly can in late November for this
Hey,
hunt. But yeah, that's the gist now as I hunt normally a week for archery and then a week for rifle. And my wife is amazing, man. And for whatever it's worth, for anybody that's listening out there, talk to your wife like in April when the game regs come out and talk to her about what you want to do as opposed to just assuming that she knows. And then when September comes around, you're like, well, see ya. Because it's been such I have not been great about communicating, but dude, it's so much better when I talk to her in April as opposed to like, well, I thought you knew I do this every year. You're just supposed to know that I'm leaving in October and
yeah.
September, and that's totally on me. So yeah, it's and it's tough. I promised myself when I started the business, I was like, I will not sacrifice my hunt for someone else's hunt. Meaning, I won't. I'll work really, really hard up to the time where it's time to hunt to try and make sure we're well within the lead time and get the holsters out and all that stuff. But I do get stressed about business and lead times and stuff like that. And there's that thing in me that's like, you only have so many Septembers. You told yourself you weren't going to sacrifice. And so I've tried to, and I've done a pretty good job of doing that. Although the work up to that point is just gangbusters. But yeah, it's trying to do an archery and a rifle hunt every year. And it is, to your point, like archery is where my heart is for sure. If you told me I had to give up my rifle or my bow, you could take the rifle for sure. The archery is just, there's nothing like it.
What you just said about like the business and that kind of pressure, because there's always going to be the last minute people who want to be able to order a holster a week before their hunt or whatever, which is also a week before your hunt, right? But it's funny because it reminds me of the tip you gave with your wife. Like it's the same communication of you doing the best you can. You're not going to reach everybody, but with your customers being like, hey, here are the lead times. Here's the best time to order. If you order after this date, it's going to be really tough to get a holster, within whatever that lead time is, etc. So those two communication aspects are helpful for your wife and your customer.
Yeah, you're right. They go hand in hand for sure.
So yeah, roll us into this hunt. I knew like you gave us the short version. You were hunting with a buddy, ended up filling a tag solo, but even before the success, all that, like what was that early part of the season? What time of year were you hunting? How did things kick off? All the good stuff.
Yeah, so I actually didn't draw the archery. So I put in for its unit. Should I say the unit? Does it matter?
No, I mean you said enough about where it was. People can draw
Okay.
conclusions.
So it was a 9 point unit. Uh and so I'd never hunted anything outside of just an over the counter unit before. And so my wife is like, all right, you got take your time. Like here's the 2 weeks that it's the rut. Do what you need to do. She's incredible, man. So we had slotted it from the 17th through the 30th of September, uh, hoping that we wouldn't need all that time. And so yeah, it was 17th, got in, and it was me and my buddy Kenny. We pulled the camper up, and just the two of us were up there. And he didn't have a tag, obviously, because again, it was a night. I say obviously, I guess it's possible that he could have, but he didn't. So it was one tag, and he was just up there to kind of, be there to help pack out and just help in whatever way he could. Make sure that I don't botch a shot and stuff like that. And so we got there, and they were on. I mean, like it was amazing. You couldn't swing a dead cat without hearing a bugle up there. It was unbelievable. I've never
And
heard
when was
anything like it.
this?
September 17th.
17th. Okay.
Yeah. And then so like 17th, 18th, and then I would say morning of the 19th. Excuse me. They were totally on. We did do some night bugling. Like we go out at whatever 10:30 at night and just hit some of the draws, and almost every draw we were hearing responses. Thank you, Paul Medell. That dude, that has been such a game changer in the way of like being able to find elk going at night, and the road bugling is amazing. And so we did that, found quite a few elk that way. And then, like I said, by the third day, I don't know if it was hunting pressure or I don't know what it was. There wasn't a whole lot of hunting pressure up there, but um, something like shut them down pretty good because they were talking the first 2 days solidly, even in the middle of the day. And we had a couple of encounters where, but we had one that kind of surprised us on opening morning. We were going after one bull, and this guy was in between the two of us, and we didn't know it until he was on top of us. And I never got to see him, but he bugled, and I made a move, and I'm sure he saw me, and he boogered off because it just got super silent after that. And then the wind starts swirling at 9 o'clock, 9:30, and basically just forces me to like sit down and babysit an elk until the wind gets right again. And so it's a lot of like coffee and snacks in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what it was, man, that turned them off, but they had shut down after day 3, at least shut down during the day. And then, so we'd had a couple of encounters there, never got to actually even draw on one. And then after, I think I had a friend that lives in Junction, and he came up, and he's the one that actually gave us a bunch of the intel. It was amazing how many people came out of the woodwork when they found out that we were hunting this unit. I had like guys just going over the top to try and help us with like spots and intel, and there's like residents in the area, and they're trying to help us. It's just unbelievable the amount of guys that just want to help on a unit like that. And so my buddy that lives down there came out and helped us scout. And man, I was so skipping pretty far ahead to like the getting to it portion. I was hunting some like thicker tall timber aspen stuff, pretty high. I think we were at probably 9,500 feet of elevation, stuff like that. And then I'd never hunted these stinking pinions before. You ever hunted pinions?
Not too much, no. I mean, I've been in them a little bit, but not, I would say I've hunted them a lot.
Yeah, it's super foreign to me because I'm used to like the dark timber, like no farther than a 40-yard shot. Uh, anyway, we get my friend who actually runs a guide service in Junction, took me to this spot where he and his daughter had scouted out some elk that were on private, but it was adjacent to this public. So we were on private. We get to these like pinion flats, and he spots a giant. I think we ranged him, and then I used Onyx too to mark him out. I think it was 1.14 miles on this like flat, like there was farmland, and anyway. And so he's like, well, let's see if he responds. And so he breaks out his bugle and rips off this. And it's one of the like Primos pack bugles too, which I like to give people hell over, but it's apparently stinking works. This bull, when he ripped off that bugle, completely turned and ran at us for like 4 minutes. It took him. No, it was probably even more than that. It might have been like 6 minutes. It took this elk, but he came in on a string from over a mile mark. It was
Dang.
unbelievable. And we watched him through the glass, and I've never seen tails like I've seen on this guy. It was unbelievable. His rack was so stinking big. He ended up coming up the hill, and meanwhile there's other bulls bugling right around us, right? So at one point we had what I would imagine is the herd bull sitting under this cliff and these pinyon pines with and he's just, every time another bull bugles, he's ripping off, but he is not moving. So I gotta imagine he's stuck up in there with a bunch of cows, which is weird because the bull that's coming into us is so big I can't imagine him being a satellite. But it was incredible. So he came in from a mile away, bugled his way in, got to within 50 yards of us behind these stinking pinions, and I actually had my bow up and I was ready to come to full draw. I just needed him to stick his head out. And Andy, my friend, is cow calling, and he's getting the responses. There's two other ones that are bugling, a little farther away from us. It was like a triangle, and that guy would not stick his head out. It was the weirdest thing. And I was like, oh, well, he's gone, because he got quiet for a minute. And after about 5 minutes, because of the other bulls that were bugling in that triangle formation, he did pipe off again. And he was standing in that same exact spot behind that same exact pinion, although I couldn't see him. He just would not come out. It was heartbreaking. And Andy was like, Gabe, I felt it in my bones that guy was going to come out. That was a dead bull, and he just wouldn't do it. So I had not a whole lot of experience in the pinions. Not that it matters. It's all elk hunting.
Yeah. So how did that encounter actually end?
It got quiet and the wind started to swirl, and we were like, we got to get out of here. So it hit like
Oh, okay. So you
nine
guys
o'clock,
backed out.
9:30. We had to back out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think he had boogered off before then anyway. And if I'm honest, I don't know if he circled us and cut our track. I know he did not wind us like solidly, but it
Hmm.
makes me wonder if he went around us and cut our track and maybe smelled our prints or whatever on the way in. I don't know. But then I was like, okay, well, this is where I'm spending the rest of the time. So I go back out. Andy had to go to work. I come back in that night. Same thing happened. Different bull. I never got to see him, but another bull came in from a different spot, got right behind a pinion 50 yards away, would not come out. So I'm like, this is killing me. So same thing. I wait till dark. I cut out. I come back that same spot the next morning and do the same exact thing. And now a third bull has come in. He's a little higher up on this flat, and same thing. And I was trying hard. Like, I'm going for broke. I started, kind of moving my way toward him while calling, and same thing, man. He hung up and could not. So it's three bulls now in the same vicinity that I just could not get to come out for that shot. So that was when I decided, when the wind started to swirl, I was like, all right, I'm getting off of this flat. I want to save it for later if I need to. And so anyway, I boogered out because of the wind, and I was like, I'm going to give that spot a break. And that's when that evening I went into this. It's like a 2 mile draw where I shot this bull. So I really wanted to kill one in the pinions, especially with as big as those guys were. And it's funny because we talked about goals before. You want to be realistic with your goals. Kenny and I had talked about goals before. He's like, well, what's your goal? It's took you 9 years to draw this tag. What do you want? And I was like, well, I got what is it, a 4x4, two fives, and a six on the wall. I'd really love to get a seven, like bad. Um, and I know they're in there. Yeah, I won't go too much deeper into that, but the gist was I'm gonna try for something big, a seven, unless it's and then you start looking through pictures and Kenny's sending me pictures. He's like, well, this guy's only a six. What happens if he walks out? And I'm like, oh, that guy's dead, right?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
oh, this guy's only a five. What happens if he walks out? I'm like, that guy's got to die,
Yeah.
right? Because they're just so much bigger than anything we've seen. And so I will say I'm pretty darn proud to say it, especially since we killed one on the second morning. We had a 5x5. We were calling, and this 5x5 came in with a cow. Matter of fact, I think we must have bugled, and we were on top of him before he even knew it. But he had this really weird, weak, uh, like growly bugle, and to the point where we heard him, and I turned around to look at Kenny, and I was like, "Is that a hunter?" And I see his eyes just get huge because he's looking right through me, and this really pretty little 5x5 with a cow is coming, through the brush, coming towards us. And so he ducks down, and he's got one of those 360 cameras. So we got some really great video of it. But he came into like 20 yards, less than 20 yards. And that cow winded us first, and then he winded us. And I didn't even come to full draw, which I should have just for practice, but I was super nervous. I was seeing, and I had the time to count the points. And I was like, yeah, I'm not day two, 9 years. I'm not shooting him yet. Right. So this
Yeah.
beautiful little 5x5. So it's the first time in my life I've ever passed on a legal animal. So, and then it's funny because probably 6, 7 days in, I'm like, dude, should you have shot that thing? Like, what
Right.
if you go home with either, with nothing, you'll never forgive yourself for not shooting that 5x5 because he was pretty. And, so yeah, that was going through my head, 5, 6 days in, and but it ended up obviously working out. So I'm really glad that I didn't shoot the 5x5 on day two because Kenny would have kicked me super hard, and I probably would have kicked myself, knowing that we still had 12 days to go. But
Right.
yeah,
Well, and it's not only the fact that you ended up shooting something bigger, it's the fact that you got to have the more experiences, the more days in the field, the story of that giant bull coming in a mile. Like none of that would have happened if you would have just filled that tag early.
you're 100% right. That's exactly what Kenny was saying too. I got to spend 6 days in the woods with my BFF, and so sit in the camper and just just doing guy stuff, which is it's just rejuvenating to the soul. And I know it's not just guys that do it, so I don't mean that, but man, it's just I need it more than I think I do. I come back a better person from this, and I know you've had guys on that have said that same thing, but it's absolutely true. I'm a better person throughout the year when I get to go and do stuff like this, and so being able to do that for 6 days with a good buddy of mine, and it's just rejuvenating. It's great for the soul. Although I'm starting to really like solo. I really like it a lot.
Which is this your was this your true first solo hunt? Because I know you hunt with buddies like a lot.
Yeah, this one. So I've hunted solo before, but I never killed anything solo.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was the first.
Successful
I'm trying
solo
to
hunt.
think successful solo hunt. Yeah, so he left on Sunday. I went back in for those three because he'd been gone for I think 3 days. I shot him on Wednesday.
Oh, was it even before killing the bull? Was it the first 24 to 48 hours of being solo? Was that a hard transition after being with people for, a week?
Not at all. No, I had done it before once, and that was a hard one. Like honestly, part of the reason that I do the death hiking and I do little stuff throughout the year is because I know I'm weak in the head. Like I I'm not as mentally gritty as some of my good buddies that are just they can grin through anything and just go, and so I have to work at that.
When you said little stuff throughout the year, what do you mean?
Like like a fasting. just to try and build up mental grit. Or one that's been really good that people laugh at me for is like cold showers. I'm like, I know that my first solo hunt, I was slotted for, I don't know, 6 days, 7 days or whatever. And I ended up basically talking myself off the mountain because I was like, oh, my wife's at home with the kids by herself. I miss my boys. My boys must miss their daddy, right? She's going through a hard time. I'm sure of it. She could really use her husband home and all this stuff that goes through my head to where I'm like, okay, well, I end up talking myself off the mountain a day or 2 days earlier than what I should. And that's just weakness. And in my head, it's just me being weak and wanting to go back to the comforts of life. And so I'll do things like the death hike is one of them. That's a big deal. That helps to build up the mental grit. But cold showers have that just forcing yourself to especially if you're not one of those guys that takes a cold shower every day, like forcing yourself to take a cold shower or do a fast or something hard where you have to basically consciously overpower your mind and your body to go, no, I'm forcing us to do this, or I'm forcing myself to do this in an effort to be more mentally gritty. And so those things, as silly as they might sound, have helped pretty significantly.
Yeah, it's not silly. And I would say it's like it's a bit of a muscle. You have to use it or lose it. And so you can't just rely on one big thing a year and then just be engaged in comfort, the other 50 plus weeks of the year. Like it is the small things throughout the year I think are really important because you have to stay engaged with making those decisions. I mean, it's funny you say that. I wasn't thinking about this till you just said little things throughout the year, but actually just yesterday, my son has a late start for school on Wednesdays. And so my schedule's different that morning because I take him to school. So he has a late start. So I was like, on Wednesdays, I've just been going for a walk in the neighborhood, like separate from a workout, just walk in the neighborhood. And I went outside yesterday and I didn't know it was supposed to rain, but it was raining. And immediately I was like, oh, I won't go for a walk. It's raining. And then right away I was like, why would you not go for a walk just because it's raining? Like you've been wet
So
before.
awesome.
You spent, 10 days in Alaska in miserable weather. Like, why can you not walk around the neighborhood when it's raining? But it was like, it's just so funny how our default, like, we're presented with a minor level of discomfort and we have the luxury to avoid it. We just want to avoid it. And so right away I was like, no, I'm going for a walk. Like, why would I not go for a walk? But as soon as I opened the garage and saw it was raining, I was like, oh, no, I shouldn't go for a walk. It's raining. And it's like just those little things throughout the year and like all the decisions we make, you just have to, it's crazy how intentional you have to be to not always make the comfortable choice.
100%. Yeah. You sparked it in my head. I remember hearing a podcast. I think you did it with Russ Meyer. He was talking about he knew because the guy works out like 18 times a day, but he's talking about how it was snowing outside and he knew he was going to run, but he needed to either he was going to go for a run outside or he's got the treadmill. And so he said he like, I don't know if he had actually stepped on the treadmill and was looking outside and just basically called himself a little punk and was like, nope, get off the treadmill, get outside, do the hard stuff. And it's like, even that, right? Like I'm already going to do the hard thing. I just need it to be a little harder to try and build that level of discomfort. And like you said, you everybody says it, right? Embracing the suck. Um, it's those quote little things that really help to embrace the suck. When Kenny leaves and I'm solo by myself for 3 days, which if I'm honest, I did not. There was no transition. It didn't bother me at all. I kind of like the being silent and by myself. I'm not great like that. So you give me, I think probably 4 or 5 days, and I start to get those high mountain blues. But and that's even it comes on even quicker if you're not seeing elk. But outside of that, like the that solo experience, I've noticed a couple of times that I hunt significantly differently. And Kenny and I actually talked about this, like being on the mountain, even though he doesn't have a tag, I feel somewhat responsible for being in the elk because he's not a caller, right? He's kind of an opportunistic hunter, and so when we go for rifle season, he doesn't probably move as much as I do, and he doesn't call. And so I have this weight on my shoulders. It's like, well, you're up here in a 9 point unit. You've kind of talked this up. You need to be in the elk so Kenny can see and enjoy and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he feels the same way. He's telling me, he's like, dude, I feel like I can't hold this guy back. It's this 9 point unit. He's worked really hard for this, blah blah. And so we're both feeling that pressure to try and help each other out as much as possible. But then, it's like when he leaves, I'm like, okay, now I just feel I love him being there. It was great having your best friend there, but it's one of those things where a little bit of that pressure was relieved, even though it wasn't anything that was put on me by him. It was just okay, now you can, if you decide that you want to sit for an extra hour, you sit for an extra hour, or if you decide you want to move, you don't have to worry, about what he's thinking and all that stuff. So I don't know if you've ever done any of that where
Oh yeah. That's
you
normal.
feel okay. Yeah, it's so that transition was pretty good. To being, by myself felt awesome. The so to get back into the actual elk, there's this like 2 mile long draw that's pretty stinking steep. There's a creek in the bottom, and anyway, it's we went up there Sunday. We went up there a couple of times. We were at the top of it, and when you get to the bottom of it, the 2 miles down the ravine, it's private land. And so we're at the top. We're hearing tons of bugles, and so we decided we're going to stay on the ridgeline and move down. And so we try and get under them. So we would move down and get ready to dump in, and hear another bugle below us. And so we would back out, go down, dump back in a few hundred yards, and hear another bugle below us. And I'm like, holy crap, there had to be, no joke, there had to be, throughout that entire draw, I bet there were 6 bulls within a 2 mile draw on one side or the other of this ravine, and they just would not shut up. It was amazing. And so we had my buddy Josh and his wife Kim showed up on Saturday, like midday. And so we got with them and took them to this place, and they were like, they had been hunting a different unit that there were just hunters stacked in. And so they hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything. And so we get into this draw, and now we're glassing the opposite side of this draw. And there's like, by their account, it was like 20 cows with this herd bull on this hillside. And that wasn't even the ones that we were going after. So Josh and I had dumped in because he can call. So Josh and I decided to go down, which I could see in Kenny's face broke his heart, because he was like, dude, does it make sense for all 4 of us to hike down this hill with the scent and the sound? And I'm like, no, it doesn't, but I want you there. And he's like, tell yourself if it makes sense. And so I was like, no, it doesn't make sense. So Josh and I, because Josh can call, go down. And I could see like that little like sad puppy face as I walked away from Kenny, because he'd been there with me for 5 days. It was hilarious, not hilarious. It was heartbreaking, but we ended up going down and not killing anything, because there were so many sets of eyes on the opposite hillside. Those cows, as much as we tried to stay in the scrub oak, they could see us, and they ended up boogering before we could get, into range. And but to that point, Josh and Kim were like, I can't believe this. There's so many bugles, and the cows are everywhere. And they saw a couple of bulls that were just amazing. And so we knew where they were. So we back out for that night, and that's ended up being where I'd killed the guy. So after all the pinyon pine hunts, I go back on an evening hunt to that same spot, and I ended up going down. There's a trail that runs the ridgeline that you can actually take a 4-wheeler, but I didn't have a 4-wheeler. I borrowed Kenny's bike, which is embarrassing, by the way. The uphill portions of me on a bike, it's I didn't realize how hard riding a bike was. I haven't ridden a bike since I was like 20. It's stupid. I don't know. Like, honestly, for death hike training this year, that's all I'm doing is riding a bike. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I used to mountain bike a fair amount in like high school and college, and basically haven't in 15, 20 years, whatever it's been. And then actually, Steve and I went on a mountain bike ride the last spring. And part of the reason I started mountain biking again was I sucked so bad, and it was so terrible that I was like, I can't, like, this is unacceptable. I can't not be able to ride a bike up a hill. So I can very much relate to that.
No, I'm embarrassed is not even the right word. It was seriously embarrassing. like the amount of wind I was sucking. It's a completely different set of like when I was training for the death hike, I was running, I got up to 13 miles. My neighbor came home as I was sitting on the porch sweating my tail off, and he goes, "How far did you run today?" I was like, 13 miles. He's like, "Holy crap, 13 miles." 13 miles was nothing compared to like 2 miles uphill on a bike. I don't know, the muscle group or whatever it is, but you're exactly right. Going uphill on a bike it's a completely different game than running.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So anyway, I was able to drive the bike down, which was great because it was all downhill. And then, trying to ride it back up was terrible. But so then that night I went in, or that evening I was so excited. I got in early, like 4 o'clock, knowing that the wind wasn't going to be right, but it was a big steep ravine. And so I knew that the wind should be blowing downhill most of the time anyway, with the creek, being in the bottom of it. So anyway, I waited. I got in. I ended up seeing this guy, glassed him up, and they were bugling the entire time. It was three bulls bugling the whole time. I don't know if you saw a video. I posted something on Instagram where you can actually hear
Yeah, the
this one.
videos
It
of
was
you, but you hear them in the background, right?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it just I get like excited just thinking about it, and but I knew the wind wasn't right, and so it's funny. I sit there and I'm like, all right, you got to sit for at least another hour before you can get the wind right, because you don't want to go in and booger these things and then blow out the entire canyon and lose this spot. So I sat there, and 6 o'clock rolls around, and I'm like, okay, well, so maybe it's ready yet. So I take the wind checker out and I'm puffing it like every 2 minutes or whatever, and I'm like, okay, 2 minutes go by, it's consistent downhill, good. 2 more minutes downhill, good. All right, it's time to go. And then I puff it again, and it blows uphill, and I'm like, golly. So I'm like, nope, gotta wait another 10. So it ended up being probably like 6:45. I think I just sat there on the hillside listening to him bugle for an hour and 15 minutes, um, waiting for the wind to get right. And then sure enough, I have two that are on my side, and one, which I think was probably the quote herd bull of this group, on the opposite side. And I didn't tell you, I had actually had him uh, the night before, or two nights before. I snuck in on him I think I ranged him at 89 yards as he ran after a cow up into the scrub oak. And I was so bummed, dude. I was like, that hike in, Mark, I was like, I'm shaking because I can hear him. I know where he is. I'm not
Mhm.
I'm not talking because he is talking, and I'm trying to sneak
Right.
in. And I'm like, when you like breathe out and you can hear your breath like quiver. It was like it was like that. And when he finally, kind of showed himself, he was just tearing tail after this cow and never gave me a shot. But I ended up, yeah, for the sake of not blowing anything else out, I ended up backing out of there too, instead of trying to follow him up the hill and get on. He was running towards private anyway. Um, so anyway, I didn't want to blow anything out of there. Sure enough, wind gets right, and I start doing these. Paul Medell calls them the pleading cow calls. It's just that real whiny, like, yeah, where he's like, the cow is like, hey, come here. She's getting frustrated. I'm here.
Mhm.
It's requesting an action. And so I did a few of those, and every time I would do it, these two bulls were ripping off, and one was even closer. The guy that was closer is the one I didn't kill. Um, and so they're totally responsive to those types of calls. And every now and again, so I have in my head, like, I've got to call and then move up so that when he comes in, I'm past the spot where he thinks he's going to see me, and I can put an arrow in him before he gets to the spot, which that's the only thing that's in my head. I'm like, if I don't play this exactly right, it's not going to happen, which is not the way it went at all, for the record. So I'm doing the soft pleading cow calls, and every now and again, so he would bugle back, and then he would just shut up and stop and listen. And I was trying to not cow call because I had moved up a little. Um, but he would stop. And so he would bugle once, and he wouldn't move unless I gave him a response. And so sure enough, I hit him with some more pleading cow calls, and then he'd fire back up and start coming in again. And this was me just listening to him. I couldn't see him at the time, but, finally I hit him with that contact buzz, which is like, dude, I'm frustrated. Get your butt over here, and some more of the pleading cow calls. And he was responsive, responsive, responsive. And I remember um, I ranged a little tuft of grass down at the creek at 40, and then I ranged another one at 30. And so I had it in my head, like there's your shot. If he stops there, he's at 40. If he stops there, he's at 30. Anything past that, he's at 20. So sure enough, he comes right down. He walks right over the 40. And I remember I was at full draw, and I'm walking my bow, keeping my bow on him as he's walking down. And I in my head I go, okay, there's 40. Okay, there's 30. And after he walked past 30, I was like, okay, anything past here is 20. And he was just moving super slow, and I didn't even think to stop him like with a bark or anything. It was just my pin was on him, the 20 pin was there, and sure enough, I sent it. And I remember the sound of that arrow hitting him was like not quite like a drum, but like I've never heard that impact before, where it enters the cavity, and it was such a cool sound, man. And he was still, I didn't know it at the time, but he was still quartering towards me more than what I thought. But that arrow disappeared, which was a really good sign. And so uh, I finally calmed myself down. I was doing the whole shaking thing, and waited a little while to try and go, put eyes on a blood trail or whatever. And so it's starting to get darker pretty quick. And so I crossed the creek, and I'm looking up the creek, and I see really good. I got pictures of it. Really good frothy lung blood, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's done. And now it's getting real dark real quick. And so by the time I put my headlamp on now, and I'm still tracking, and it's one of those things where I'm like, all right, just leave him alone, let him die tonight, come back for him in the morning. And then that thing in my head is like, okay, just find one more piece of blood, one more drop of blood. And so I go up and I find one more, and then I'm like, okay, back out. But then the little devil on my shoulder is like, no, one more. So I go, I'm looking for one more. And sure enough, as I get to this patch of blood, and I hear like this ruckus above me, and I look up the ridge, and he up this little hill, and he is standing up, staring at me over these small aspens. And my headlamp hits him in the eyes, and I'm staring him in the face, and he's just looking at me, and he doesn't spook, he doesn't move. And I was like, gosh, dang it, you pushed too hard, you dummy. And so I immediately drop the headlamp to the ground, and I back out slow, and I'm like, I got to come back in the morning. And so the blood that I saw was so good. I shimmy up the hill. Took me a bit to get out because the scrub oak was so daggum thick. For the record, I hate scrub oak and aspen saplings with a fiery passion. Yeah. Get back to the camper, do a video that I haven't posted yet, where I'm like, oh, I shot him, it's going to be so great. And it's just, this dude with a freaking selfie camera turned on in his own camper, just freaking out and saying, well, you know how it is. So excited. And, woke up the next morning knowing that he was going to be dead. Like I knew, because the blood it's just big patches of lung blood. I was like, oh, he's done, to the end that I didn't even, I thought to myself, do I even really need to bring the bow? And thankfully I brought the bow, but I was like, oh, he won't even need it. He's dead. Brother, I was so excited I didn't even eat. I got Kyle Camp in my head going, just take some gummy bears, right? So I dump off the hillside, get out of the truck, and I had like a handful of gummy bears for lunch. Or for breakfast. I didn't even eat, and it was still, a little dark as I was walking in. So I get back to the same spot that I was in, and I start walking up the hill, and where I saw him the night before, he was no longer there. But I walk up another, 50 or 100 yards, and I hear this gurgle. And I look up the hill, and I'm thinking, oh man, the coyotes are on him. I look up the hill, and sure enough, he stands up and he's staring at me. And I was like, I could not believe he was still alive. And so he turns, and it wasn't like a full on like booger. Like he didn't run hard, but he moved at a pretty good clip. But the one thing that was encouraging is that he refused to move uphill. He would not. So he stayed on the trail right next to the creek. And So I had a chance to knock an arrow when I very first saw him, but I couldn't come to full draw in time before he had turned and moved. Um, so I just dogged him for whatever, 100 yards, 200 yards. And finally, after seeing him two more times, he had stopped and was on the trail, but completely facing away from me. And I walked up on him and had to reposition myself slightly down by the creek. So he still hadn't looked back. He hadn't heard me. You could tell he was stung pretty darn hard, um, which I hated to see. But anyway, he stopped and he stood there, gave me a 40-yard shot. So I made sure to range him. It came to full draw, nice and slow. Put the 40 pin on him and put it on his left side, right behind the ribs, and sent it. And then dude, when that arrow, the second arrow went into him, he actually like turned and looked at me and like peered into my soul as that second arrow went in. And as he saw me, he moved up the creek a little ways, and I actually had enough time to take my phone out because he started getting the drunk legs where he's kind of wobbly. And I took the phone out and hit the camera and got video of him like standing there for about a second and a half and then finally toppling over into the creek, which I actually haven't posted it yet, but it's amazing. And he falls over this tree, moves the entire tree, and dumps into the creek. And I remember,
Wow.
He died in the water. So when I walked up on him, he still wasn't quite there. And I remember like I'm talking to him out loud. I'm like, buddy, please get up. Please get up and take 2 steps out of the creek, please. And he was just like, he was not having it. He couldn't do it. And don't get me wrong, I'm so thankful and so blessed for that animal. But yeah, he ended up expiring right there in the creek after all of that. But I'm just so baffled at how stinking tough they are. He lived on, as much as I don't like to say it, he lived on one lung the entire night. And I don't know how it actually happened, but I found the first 5 inches of arrow and broadhead in his back left. Back left haunch, in his back left quarter, when the arrow went in the front right quarter. And then I don't know if it hit a rib or glanced off the shoulder blade or what, but went in the back left quarter. I was amazed that it had zipped almost all the way through him. And he lived the entire night like that. And then that second shot was the one that obviously punched the second lung and was able to put him down. But it was like nothing I've ever experienced. It was unbelievable. I'm super grateful, but also like, and I think you do this too. I know a lot of guys do this. Like, what could I have done better? What, could I have, should I have waited another 5 seconds? And then maybe not had him quartering as hard. But then I'm in my head like going, okay, well, if you'd have waited 5 seconds, maybe he would have turned and looked at you and boogered. You don't know. Right. Mm-hmm. And so all those things going through my head, but there's always that one thing that's like, what could you have done better? So anyway, for whatever that's worth, it's just, yeah, that's when he went down and dumped in the creek. And it was incredible. And then it was like go time. It was warm out. The temperature had been like 80 degrees, although I was pretty safe and I didn't know it at the time, but I was pretty safe because the creek was down there. It's in a pretty steep place where the sun only gets direct, on that spot.
For a short time.
Very small percentage of the day. Yeah. And so, it was just time to go to work. And it's funny because I'm 190 pounds ish. And I'm like, okay, well, I know you're not going to be able to move this thing, but you got to try because he's in the water. So I grabbed this guy by his antlers and there's nothing doing. Like, it was stupid of me to even just try. Right. I was like, I got to give it a shot. Right. So yeah. I could not move him out of the water until I had gotten 3/4 off of him. And then I was able to move him to get that final quarter off. But it was just time to go to work. And it was one of those things where you're like, I've done it a bunch of times and I really actually enjoy the breakdown process. But I've not done it solo. So I'm super thankful I had some paracord, and there was one tree where I could tie off his first quarter, but that was the only place that I could use that paracord. You couldn't use it on any other, there was no other trees around to be able to use it. And it was more of like dude, you're just going to have to muscle this thing as best you
Yeah.
can. And so first quarter came off, it was awesome. But yeah, the rest of it was just like, holy crap. I mean, trying to move it all, by yourself was good. I actually ended up, I had one of those, not Havalon, the outdoor edge knives, which I really like
Hmm.
because I'm not great at, I know you're into fixed blade. I know and I ended up using a fixed blade most of the time because my outdoor edge, I had set it down on the plastic bag that I had set down so I could set the meat on it. And I ended up, bottom line, kicking the plastic bag, getting pissed off at it, and then shucking the bag away from me, which I forgot had my knife on it. And
Yeah.
so, so I had a fixed blade, oddly enough, that showed up. This is how kind our customers are. I mean, I had a customer send me a fixed blade, like a really nice, it's one of the Benchmade hunting knives out of the blue with the Ivory logo on it. It showed up the day before I left for the hunt. Like,
Oh my gosh, how cool.
yeah, with no explanation. It just said, "Hey, remember it's a gift. Blessings." That was it, and
That's amazing.
no signature, no nothing. I've since found out who it is, but it was, yeah. So I ended up using this thing to do the rest of the elk with. It was just so awesome. It was just I'm the most blessed guy on the planet, truly. Uh, yeah, I don't want
Amazing.
to keep babbling.
No, you're good, man. Yeah, I've done that with knives, like where you either, I've never lost one, but I've done the stupid thing of like, where did I set that? And now like breaking down the animal, like I don't want to step on it. I don't want to grab it. So I definitely have learned by terrible decisions. Like if I'm working on an animal, it's either I keep, depends which knife I'm using. Like it's in the sheath and either around my neck or in the pocket. But if I like, even for a moment, I'm gonna like set down a knife and not sheath it, sounds graphic, but I just basically shove it somewhere in the animal, right? Um, I never set it on the ground or on a game bag or anything like that because I've done that in the past and made mistakes. So I just pretty much like it's either safe and on my body or it's pretty much on the animal's body.
That's super, super smart. I will absolutely. So that number one, I'll be doing that in the future. But number two, I think my second takeaway is don't ever buy a black knife for hunting
Yeah,
or a blue knife. Orange is the only color that any hunting knife should ever be in.
it does make a difference, man. Especially like the bull I just killed in Idaho. We were breaking it down at night, and you begin to realize with multiple things like, man, I'm glad my inReach is orange or my knife is orange or those little things. It's not always like I'm not a flashy guy. I don't like colors, but then you find situations where it's like, oh man, I'm glad that sucker is visible.
Yeah, for sure. I got my arrows. I fletch them in pink, uh, and it's all because a buddy of mine who worked at the archery shop was like, "Dude, what do you know that's in nature that's pink?" I'm like, "Nothing." He's like, "Exactly. Like
Yeah.
you can find your arrow if you fletch it in camo fletching in your hose, that thing's gone." So yeah, yeah, it makes a big difference. You're
Yeah.
right.
Was it a front or rear quarter that you were able to tie off?
The rear, thankfully,
Oh, that's good.
oh, it was so good. And I'd never I mean, never packed one out solo before, but I don't know that I ever would have thought of that until I heard somebody say it on one of the podcasts about taking paracord and being able to tie it off on a tree. And I was like, that is genius. So my kill kit now has a bunch of paracord in it. And it was a godsend because I did fight with it for a second, just trying to muscle it. And it was just
Mhm.
dumb. It was dumb. It was like, you would just, that whole thing, you would laugh just with me, trying to fight this, I don't know how many pounds he was.
They're freaking heavy, man. Like rear quarters of a, decently mature bull are just heavy.
Those were the hardest to pack out too, was the two rears. I've never shot a bull this big. I packed a lot of elk off mountains, and I didn't realize how big he was until I actually got the skull home and put him up next to the other 6x6, and it's not even close. Like he dwarfs everything I have on the wall right now.
Really?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, mass wise, number one,
Yeah.
like he's so much thicker. And so I was like, man, that's why those hindquarters felt so stinking heavy, because
Yeah.
they were. And so, yeah, just, and I don't think it helped because I had, the only thing I had was like uh, gummy bears. And so I was just like wolfing down. I didn't have anything substantial that day, which was a huge mistake. Like I packed out so it took me, which I don't know how embarrassing it is to say. I'm pretty proud, but it took me about I want to say 4.5 hours to get them broken down and into game bags and, get the basically from the knee down off of him, all that stuff, which I know there are guys that can do it in like whatever, 20 minutes, but I'm not one. And so I wanted to make sure that do my due diligence specifically around the back straps, tenderloins, all that stuff. I hate hacking that stuff up to where it's all
Yeah.
mangled and gnarly. So I take my time on a lot of that stuff, but it took about 4 hours, 4.5 hours to get them broken down, if I remember the timing right. And then I went out with one load the first hind quarter and then came back in. And now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't have ice. That's what I did. That's why it took so long. So I went out with the first quarter, went into this little shop in town real quick, bought as much ice as I could buy, threw it in the cooler, drove back up, dumped back in, picked up the other hind, and came out. And I think it was probably 5:30 when I ended up out with the second hind. But I'm running on gummy bears, and I think I might have taken some of those little cheese crackers, and that was it for the day.
Oh
And
man.
it was not good. And it was excitement and not thinking. And so the entire day, all I'd had was that sugar and that little bit of carbs. And I think the thing that was most telling about that is that the next day when I packed out the rest was so much better because I had woken up, I'd had a solid breakfast, and then try to keep the gummy bears going throughout the entire time of the pack out. But dude, it's for the heavy, I might be able to run whatever 13 miles on a handful of gummy bears and some Gatorade, but not with 2 loads of 80 pounds on my back or whatever it was. Gummy bears are just not enough.
So you basically got both rear quarters out essentially the first day of packing meat and then was able to finish up the second day.
Yeah, exactly. He went back, and I thought because I had put all the scrap meat like neck meat, back straps, tenderloins. I put those in with the front quarter bags, which made them obviously significantly heavier. But so I was thinking to myself, I had 5 trips, the two rears, and then 2 fronts with each side's worth of scrap meat that I did not. Anyway, bottom line, and then I had to come back in for the head. So I was like, there's going to be 5 trips. And so I went down there and I was like, well, maybe just try it. Like throw those 2 fronts on. They're freaking
Yeah. You have
huge.
a little video clip of this I saw. I love it.
Yeah, it was, dude, I was like, I honestly didn't know. And then it was one of those things where you see in the videos, like guys will like sit down to put their pack on and then they roll over like a beached whale and then kind of hoist themselves up from their bellies. It was like that. So I put those 2 quarters on the pack and got it all cinched down super nice and tight, to where they were not moving at all. Man, I don't know if I know you have used, like in the past, we used the old like Boy Scout frame where you had to basically use paracord to cinch your meat down to it, and it sloshes with every step back and forth, side to side, and kind of throws you off balance. But the the lashing straps, to be able to lash that thing as tight as you can to the frame, to where it's not sloshing around and loose, it's such a massive difference. So that is super helpful. And I also found out where I'm going to put those, because the K4 comes with those locking buckles. I'm definitely putting those on the the frame straps where it straps the meat to the frame. Under the bag, I'm putting one there for sure. It was so nice. Not that it moved, but I'm like, when I put the head on, it was just the strap came over the snout to the point where the buckle was right on the snout, and I was thinking to myself, like it wouldn't tighten up because it was basically the buckle was being pulled at the wrong angle until I slid the buckle to the right side of the snout and then cinched it down super tight. But it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, if I'm going to put the locking buckle on, I'm going to put it on the meat loaders or whatever. But yeah, for whatever that's worth, those locking buckles are not a necessity, but I think they'll be, especially if you were using like if you bone it out. I don't know if you bone out your stuff or if you go bone in most. most of the time. But if I go boned out, I think the ability to have it not slosh around is going to be critical. But I've never been on a pack out so far in that I haven't had to. I have had to bone it out, but
Hmm.
yeah, I can see the value there.
Yeah. So you did both front quarters plus the loose meat all in one load?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
freaking solid, dude. That's heavy.
It was heavy. Yeah. It was awesome, man. I take, so to full disclosure, one of the tenderloins I had taken up in one of the big game bags. So there was
Oh, full
one
disclosure, you
piece.
took a whole,
Yeah.
14 ounces out of that. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, strapped it on and I was like, "Oh dude, you can do this." Like it sucked, right? But I was like, "Oh, you're going to be okay."
That's a
So
solid load. Yeah.
yeah, it was good. Climbing up the hill, and I had done I tracked my route on the way in from the truck down to the meet. I had tracked my route, so I knew which way to go to get the least amount of resistance from the saplings and the scrub oak,
Hmm.
um, which worked really well because I was watching Onyx the whole time, and that got me out to the point where I wasn't, like absolutely furious at myself. Um, except for on the head, I was so excited. It was the last load. I threw the head on. I'm walking out, and sure enough, I stop looking at my map, and I end up going straight into this like uh, aspen grove, and I go straight into the aspen grove, and like I get to a point where I'm like, all right, you're just gonna. I now I'm pissed, and I'm just gonna barrel through. Just do it. And so I start walking up, and the rack is so wide that I hit these two aspens like a doorway, and the rack just stopped on the aspens, and now I'm livid. And I don't talk to myself when I'm by myself like ever, but I was talking to myself out loud that day. I'm like literally out loud in the conversation. It's like, you jackass. Now you're going to have to drop back down another 50 yards to get out of these trees. And then you're going to have to go left. And when you go side hill for the next 100 yards, and then you go back up the same steep hill you came in. And then there's the other guy so it's a conversation. It's a weird, like, two-way conversation.
With your
So the other guy,
personalities.
oh, dude, it was funny. The other guy is like, bro, like, take it easy. You got nowhere to be. Like, you got the last load out. It's all on ice. So it takes you an extra 20 minutes. Calm down. And I'm like,
Yeah.
there's that like internal battle, but that was all out loud. And then I was like, dude, you probably won't even remember this at the end. You're never going to tell anybody about this, and you're not even going to remember it. I'm saying those things out loud to myself. It's so freaking funny.
That is funny.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
I'm the
got that.
same way, man. When like, especially when it's the last load, right? You've already done a bunch of work, you're tired, and now you're packing out like this awkward rack and getting hung up on stuff and all that. Like, we're just on my elk hunt last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever that was doing the same thing and like struggling through this real thick section. And, Steve's just laughing at me, right? Because he has a heavy pack, but he doesn't have to deal with the rack. And
Yeah.
I'm just like back there yelling at myself. And he's like, I mean, it's one of the benefits of shooting small stuff, just giving me trouble.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. And it's funny because I sit here and say that, and we're like, oh, boo freaking who. Like, I gotta worry about the rack hitting
Pack out
trees.
my white elk rack.
Right. When there's 95% of other dudes aren't packing elk that same time of year. And so, like, I feel so sorry for myself. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sweet misery.
Yep. Super good stuff.
Man, that's such a cool story. I just love, that you got the opportunity, the days in the field to share it with people and have all the bugling action and see elk, but then had the solo aspect of it. Like, it's just you jammed a lot of awesome experiences into the trip. And obviously, I'm always this way, but that's what it's about for me. Cause like when you look at that, I know you did a Euro. When you look at that Euro in the future, it's not just like, oh, that's that elk I killed. It's like that's the trigger to remember all the memories, all the highs and lows, like the people who were there, the fact that you ended up doing it. So like all of that comes back when you then have that elk to look at in the future.
100%. I've thought of that exact, what you just said. I've thought of that exactly, like, a lot of times. Like, I know there are people that are out there that are like, you guys are trophy hunters, and you just want to kill and put big racks on the wall. And what they don't get is exactly what you just said. That is not, it's not just bones on the wall. That is every antler I have on the wall is a memory that's tied to that experience and who was there and what went on and how hard it was and all of that stuff. It's legitimately looking at a memory when
Yeah.
you look at it. You're 100% right.
Oh man, what other anything we didn't hit in terms of takeaways, whether that's lessons learned, things that worked great, gear, like just wide open, like anything else that we did. I feel like we covered a ton, so I don't feel like you have to add to it, but I want to make sure we're not like leaving something on the table.
No, I mean, there's stuff for me personally, like trying to trying to be better about waiting. I've been bad about this in the past, waiting for the shot. Um, because as soon as I see the elk, and I know it's not just me, but it's man, it's prevalent. That whole, and it doesn't matter if it's a rifle or a bow. Everything in me says, go, go, go. He's going to get away. He's going to get away. I mean, and it happens fast. Like it's almost like I can hear myself going, you got to shoot now. You got to shoot now. And I have to really consciously try and slow myself down ahead of time because that just and I've shot a couple of bulls in the shoulder blades because of that exact like drive, which if I'm honest, you always have more time than you think you do, and even if you
Hmm.
don't, you can still bark and stop them, right? So like I don't I don't know. Last year's bull with the rifle was the first time I was actually pretty darn calm, and I think it was because I had barked. I had to bark at him twice because he was tearing tail downhill, and I barked at him twice, and that's when he stopped. And just like Paul Medell says he will, right? He stops and he looks at you. Um, that was the first time that I was actually calm enough to go, okay, take your time, squeeze it off, don't slap it, squeeze it, right? And so I got to really work. So the takeaway for me is just working on actively controlling my brain in those high stress situations where it's like I need to make that a part of my normal shooting routine, which is I know a lot of people say they have a mantra before they shoot, like squeeze or hold or sight align, whatever it is, you tell yourself
Hmm.
out loud. I've got to really work on doing that. But that's the main takeaway uh, for me. I think is just I I I owe it to that creature to try and put the best shot on it as I possibly can. And so I got to try and override that panic that goes on in my head when. And it's funny to me because there's some guys that don't get that. They don't seem to get that at all. Like I've talked to a lot of guys. I'm like, do you get all jacked up? And they're like, some guys are like, well, I get super jacked up, but it's only after the shot, and then they start to shake uncontrollably and stuff like that. And I'm like, after the shot, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I don't know. I don't know. Some guys are just super cool, but I'm not one of them. So that I think that's probably my main takeaway.
Yeah, that's really, really good stuff. I think what you just said though, those are somewhat connected. Urgency is tied to like a manifestation of anxiety because you feel that pressure of like this moment's going away, this moment's going away. Versus I think if you've, at least in my experiences, because I've been there, sometimes still am, but I will say, especially over the last handful of years, have been able to be more patient, more calm, and just remind myself like I have more time than I think. And I think as you begin to take that time, you naturally are calmer about the entire experience, right? Um, I can't think of a moment in this, definitely in the last 2 or 3 years where I've been jacked up before the shot. And I think part of it is me over time learning to take it slower, knowing I have more time. Like that immediately like lowers my anxiety level because I very much relate to what you're saying. When you feel like there's the animal, I have to shoot now. Like that builds that anxiety, that builds that excitement. Whereas it's like, oh, there's the animal. Let me get set up to shoot. Let me make sure this is good. Like it just is a totally different experience. And I don't think it's an easy switch to flip, but I would just say that as you force yourself to slow down, I think you'll naturally have like a little bit less nerves about the whole thing too.
Is there something that you did to try and flip that switch? Is there like a mantra or
No, I think it's exactly what you
breathing
just said. It's
or
being aware of it, right? Like
gotcha, gotcha.
yeah, I 100% relate to everything you said, and then just realizing, all right, I have to force myself to slow down. I have to remind myself I have more time than I think I do. Um, yeah, things like that. So, and it's, there's still situations like if it's super close or, the like archery elk's freaking, it's different than a lot of other things too. So I'm not saying this only about archery elk. It's much easier to get like super jacked up when you have a bull at 20 yards and you've been hearing them screaming and all that stuff versus
For sure.
some
Yeah,
of the examples I'm talking about have been rifle shots that it's a calm animal. They're unaware of your presence. They're not screaming in your face. They're not at 20 yards, right? So some of it is hypocritical of me to say like, oh, it's easy to be calm because it's different contexts, but I still think the principle is true of like if you can force yourself to slow down, you're gonna find yourself a little bit calmer just in general. I'm not saying all the butterflies won't go away, you won't be jacked up, etc. But yeah, I think they go hand in hand a bit.
yeah. And I think to your point with the rifle, there's value in numbers too, right? And the number of elk. So maybe after you've killed 8, 10, 20 bulls or whatever, maybe you just naturally, whether it's rifle or bow, you just naturally tend to calm down. I can't imagine like these guys like Corey Jacobson and Paul Medell and these guys that just they don't walk out their front door without killing out, probably don't even get nervous anymore, right? Like
Yeah.
they just walk out. Oh, there's one, and they wait for it to get into position and send it, and then pull the truck up. But I'm not there yet. But I will. Yeah, it's to your point. I think you're exactly right. Knowing it, excuse me, knowing it beforehand, and then being able to even a day before go, okay, calm down. Because
Yeah.
that's what I told Kenny. Kenny, when he came up, he's like, "What do you want me to do?" I'm like, "What? You just be here to help with the pack, and then if you're with me when I come to full draw, I just need you to whisper in my ear the word settle. Just settle." Because
Hmm.
the last couple of times I didn't settle my pin and it totally hosed me. Um, so just that whole like verbal thing that goes settle, 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 right? To where I can
Hmm.
override the anxiety. And so, yeah, it's a work in progress. It'll be fun to see what happens, the next time we got a rifle hunt with my boy coming up, and I'll be really interested to see what happens if we end up being able to put him on a bull. And I got a cow tag for that season too, so
That's awesome,
we'll
man.
see. Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Well, thanks for the time. It's fun to hear the story of the hunt, fun to hear about Ivory. Obviously don't want to let you go without people being able to hear about where to check out your stuff and all that good fun. Not only I would say holsters, I will say I'm not like super into social media. I generally don't have Instagram on my phone, but I'll check it like from my computer. And every time I see you post something, I'm like, ooh, I'll check this out. You're just a funny dude. So I'd say even if you don't generally like following people on Instagram, you're worthy of a follow, Gabriel.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Some folks don't don't get my sense of humor, which is it's funny because it makes me want to ramp it up even more. So for real quick, I had one video a couple of years ago, like these elk hunting pro tips, and basically the tip was when you find a fresh elk scat, you pick up one nugget and put it in your mouth, and it'll tell you which direction they went. And there's like most of the comments are like, "Oh my gosh, that's so funny," and there's one guy on there that's like, "You're an idiot," and I'm like, "Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. It's meant to be idiotic. It's like watching Dumb and Dumber. You're not watching it because the content is amazing. You're watching it to laugh. It's just funny. So when you say that, I'm like, all right, somebody gets it. That's good.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Is it just Ivory Holsters on Instagram?
Yeah, yep. There's one clown I think that tried to clone the account. So if it's strictly just Ivory Holsters. If there's anything like an underscore or anything like that, that's not us.
Okay.
But yeah, yep.
And website is just ivoryholsters.com.
You got it. Yeah. And
Perfect.
then yeah, I'm so excited about that release holster, man. I can't wait to get one in your hands and those will be up hopefully within the next 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, it's really targeting toward the archery specific industry is kind of kind of exciting to me. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Cool. Well, I'll leave links to everything in the show description, and thanks again, man.
Mark, you're amazing, man. I really appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Well, what a story. Thanks, Gabriel, for sharing it with us. Once again, for you guys listening, check out the links in the show description to get in contact with Gabriel, or follow him on Instagram, or check out the holster offerings that he has on his website. If you have any questions for us, reach out, send an email to podcast@exomountgear.com. We would love to hear from you, whether you have a hunting story, a guest or topic suggestion for a future podcast, or anything like that. As always, if you're enjoying the show, it would help us tremendously if you can leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app that you're using, or just send it directly to a friend that may enjoy the show as well. We appreciate you guys doing that and your support of the show. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive future episodes automatically, and we'll talk to you soon.